The dust of Redemption Gulch settled on everything that day. A fine, pale coat on the hats of silent men and the bonnets of watchful women. It was a town that held its breath, waiting. At the center of their gaze, by the newly built courthouse steps, stood Elara. She wasn't from these parts, a fact made plain by the worn fabric of her dress and the way she held herself, like a lone tree on an open plain. The whispers had started a week ago, carried from the saloon to the general store, then from house to house. They spoke of a stolen locket, a family heirloom belonging to the mayor's wife. The town's new sheriff, eager to prove his worth, had found it among Elara's few possessions. Now, she stood, accused, her quiet denials lost in the rising tide of public opinion. No one spoke a word aloud. There was no need. The judgment was in their eyes, in the tight set of their jaws. The sheriff, a young man named Calloway, stood stiffly beside her, his hand resting on his pistol, not for a threat, but as if to ground himself. He'd ordered her to stand there for an hour, a public spectacle, a warning to any other newcomers with loose morals. The sun beat down, and the silence was a hammer. Each beat a fresh wave of shame. Elara's gaze was fixed on the worn toes of her boots. Her world shrunk to that small patch of dirt. The crowd shifted. A door creaked open across the street. From the shadowed doorway of the blacksmith shop, a figure emerged. It was Silas Blackwood. He wasn't a lawman or a preacher, just a man who'd seen more winters than most in the valley. He wiped his hands on a leather apron, his movements slow and deliberate, and walked into the sunlit street. He didn't hurry. He crossed the dusty expanse, his boots making soft thuds that seemed to echo in the quiet. The crowd parted for him, a silent show of respect for a man who rarely spoke but whose words carried weight. He stopped a few feet from the courthouse steps, his eyes not on Elara, but on the young sheriff. "That's enough, Calloway." His voice was low, rough from the forge, but it cut through the tension like a hot knife through iron. Sheriff Calloway flinched, his face flushing. He was the law here. "She's a thief, Silas. The town needs to see justice done." Silas took another step, now standing at the bottom of the steps. He finally looked at Elara, a quick, appraising glance. Then his eyes returned to the sheriff. "This isn't justice," Silas said, his voice firm. "This is a show, not here, not in our town." He then looked past the sheriff, his gaze sweeping over the silent faces in the crowd. "Let her be." The words were simple, but they landed with the force of a judge's gavel. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. Doubt began to flicker in eyes that had been so certain just moments before. They looked from Silas to the sheriff, then to the woman on the steps, seeing her not as a criminal, but as a person, isolated and afraid. Sheriff Calloway hesitated, his authority challenged. He was young, and he'd misjudged the character of the town he'd sworn to protect. He looked at Silas, a man whose family had founded this settlement, then at the faces in the crowd, now unreadable. His hand fell away from his pistol. With a sharp nod, he turned to Ilara. "You can go," he said. The words clipped. Ilara looked up, her expression a mixture of confusion and fragile hope. Slowly, she descended the steps, her movements stiff. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't applaud. They simply watched, a heavy, shared understanding passing between them. They had been part of the judgment, and now they were part of the release. One by one, they began to disperse, turning back to their shops, their homes, their daily chores. Silas watched her walk away, her back straight, her head held a little higher than before. He turned and walked back to his forge without another word. The cost was clear on Sheriff Calloway's face. He sought to build his reputation with a firm hand, but had instead been taught a lesson in mercy by a blacksmith. His authority was intact, but his pride was not. Later that week, the mayor's son, a boy of 10, confessed. He'd taken the locket on a dare, hiding it in the newcomer's things to avoid a whipping. The news traveled just as fast as the initial accusation, but this time it was carried with a quiet sense of atonement. A few days later, a small package appeared on the anvil in Silas's smithy. Inside was a freshly baked apple pie, still warm. There was no note. Silas knew who it was from. He cut a slice and ate it standing there, the scent of cinnamon mixing with the coal smoke. He looked out the wide door of his shop at the town of Redemption Gulch. It was a hard place built on rock and grit, but some things he knew were stronger than rock. On the frontier, a person's name was all they had, and sometimes it took the quiet strength of a neighbor to keep it from being ground into the dust. Out here, a moment of grace could last longer than a lifetime of judgment.